Welcome, everybody, back to the podcast for 4-Star. This is a very special episode. This is our 100th episode, and we'll have a special guest on. We'll have some other things to talk about. But when we started this, Chris, we never thought we'd be at 100 episodes, and here we are. Chris Reardon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, it seemed I wasn't even thinking about being in the hundreds or the triple digits or anything. So it seems a bit crazy now, but you just kind of keep going through it, and this is where we're at. It's crazy.
Well, and that's what we'll start out with today. We will begin our podcast now. I'm Brian Kasal. I'm your host of the podcast, the Chief Investment Officer and Chief CEO of 4-Star Wealth. And Chris Reardon, our Director of Development and everything important at 4-Star. Chris Reardon, welcome to the...
Thank you, Brian.
Excellent. Well, good. We have a lot to talk about today on a 100th episode. Chris, let's talk about what's we've had a crazy economy and the markets are kind of gyrating, but now they hit new highs. Chris, what's the positioning between the different markets? What's our tally scores today?
Yeah. So since the last podcast, and some of these may, I guess, surprise, like you said, Brian, we're kind of hitting new highs, but domestic equities is still the number one, no surprise there, but it actually lost 4 points from the last podcast. So we are seeing that slow slightly. And what will really gain from it is commodities. So commodities is in the number 2 position. It gained 5 from the last podcast. So domestic lost 4, commodities gained 5. It's at 268. Domestic equities in number 1 is at 315 tally points. The biggest gainer in commodities is definitely oil, which we'll talk about, but oil's hitting all-time highs as well. And you still have industrial metals, some agricultural products, and other commodities that are doing well right now. International equities is in the number 3 position. It lost 2 from the last podcast, so it's at 236. So it continues to weaken slightly. I think where you've seen that significant weakness is out of the Asia Pacific, specifically China. They've had trouble. We talked about it, I think, on the last podcast, especially from the real estate side over there. There's a lot of volatility. Fixed income in the number 4 position. It gained 1 point, pretty much a non-factor. Cash in the 5th position lost 2 points, so it's at 95 from the last podcast. And then currencies is still in last. It gained 1 point and 50. So still really a game of the top 3 versus bottom 3. Bottom 3 are by far none so far below. They're really a non-factor, the top 3. But we are starting to see commodities pull away a little bit, which is interesting. So we are starting to see commodities diverge away from international equities. And if domestic equities continues to weaken, it still has whatever ways to go. But if we continue to see these trends, there's the potential that commodities would overtake domestic equities. Like I said, it's still ways away for that to even happen. But as the trends are going, that would be a possibility.
And that has only happened once in the last 15 years, and it happened for 2 months in 2015 when the commodities were ranked number 1, and they quickly faded.
Yeah, I think it was around Brexit, and I think that even had to do with gold. You had a lot of, it was like a two-month period where you had gold skyrocket because Brexit was happening and no one knew kind of where to be, and they were afraid currencies were going to plummet. So I think that was the only time. And I feel like if that does happen, the probability of it being short-lived, I think, is potentially high, just because I think domestic equities are more stable. Commodities still could trend well for a while, no doubt there, but they're a little bit more volatile. They'll rise and they'll fall more consistently, whereas domestic equities tends to kind of hold that number 1 spot more consistent.
It does. Commodities tend to be very spiky up and down.
Yep, that's very true.
Okay, well, thanks, Chris. So just talking about the markets, we're hitting new highs. We talked about the narrowing of performance of the individual components of the market. So we're seeing more and more money flow into certain commodity sectors. Technology is not ranked number 1 anymore. A lot of dividend names are doing better. So a lot of very different market than last year. And so different groups are trending, but the bullish percent index is at 54%, which means only 54% of the stocks are in a bullish trend. That means 46% of stocks are in a bearish trend, but yet we're hitting new highs. So how does that happen? That happens because the largest names in the index are dominating the index. And this is exactly where we were in the 1999 period before the market crash. Now, I'm not predicting a market crash. I'm just saying there's a narrowing in performance, but that can change. We've seen a narrowing in performance fan out into other areas of the market too, depending on how much money flows into the market. So that's what we're seeing right now. And so to outperform benchmarks, you have to be concentrated heavily in the areas of strength and avoid the areas of weakness. And that's what we've been trying to do. We're also seeing a lot of very interesting changes in the market and the economy because, once again, COVID is always still in our way. And Southwest Airlines stock, Chris, was down 6.5% on one day last week. And it was all about disruption of the flight. 27% of their flights were canceled. They blamed it on weather and the regulator, but the reality is there's been essentially like a slow walkout, quiet walkout among the pilots, and now we're seeing it in more airlines. And then some airlines, like Delta, have backed away from their mandate. They were going to have a vaccine mandate, and they backed away. United has gone ahead with it and actually have let go of a few hundred people. Originally, well, it was like 600 people. Now it's only a few hundred people. But, how far do we go with mandates, especially in an environment where it appears the virus is going away, but others are saying they want vaccine mandates. So it's really, the question is the vaccine mandates, is that affecting the economy now? And there's pretty good evidence, Chris, that it is. And we're seeing that play out in different stocks, especially the airline industry that's been rankled by this.
Well, and I think the airline industry is dealing with it kind of from two fronts, because they had, a year ago, they had throttled back a lot of the routes, and now they're trying to bring more online. So they're dealing with less staff because staff are walking out, or staff aren't getting vaccinated, or whatever. So you're dealing with less staff on that side, but they want to bring more flights out. So you're kind of dealing with them having to cancel flights because they thought they'd have staff here and stuff. So that's what led to a lot of the cancellations. They almost overpromised. They thought there'd be more people there. They thought they'd have the capacity. You're definitely seeing, I think the airlines are getting hit the hardest because they're trying to kind of re-normalize. You have people that want to travel now, and you're having a lot of people that are traveling. And so they're trying to take advantage of that. But with the staffing issues they're running into, it's certainly, just like we're seeing even just from the general supply side, for items, for goods, we're seeing that from staffing with airlines. So it's kind of getting crippled from that standpoint.
In other industries, to a lesser extent or less profile, airline industry very high profile, because a lot of people are trying to travel again. As we tape this podcast, I'm in Cancun, Mexico, and we just took an airplane flight down to Mexico. So people are starting to travel again. That's why it's becoming a very big deal. Mm-hmm. So, Chris, let's turn to the economic numbers. I know you have a lot of those.
Yeah, so there's a good amount of data that came out. So the U.S. economy created 194 jobs in September, so the jobs came out. That was well below expectations, so we've usually seen it clipping at a much higher number, and that's the smallest gain we've seen since 2020. So we're hoping to see that accelerate. We've talked about this. We did see some of the unemployment benefits, the federal benefits come off coming out of early September. So hopefully we'll see that number bounce back, but the preliminary numbers haven't really seen that yet. So we added, just to give you an example, we added 366,000 in August. So it was almost half the numbers were added in September from August. But despite the slowdown in hiring, unemployment actually fell to 4.8% in September from 5.2% in August. And we talked about this before, but the reason for that is you had several people who just exited the labor force. They previously had their hands per se raised. They were looking for a job. They wanted to find a job, and they just said, I'm not looking for a job anymore. So I'm out of the labor force. So we did see the unemployment fall, even though we added less jobs than expected.
So that means they're discouraged, or they've decided that they like working for benefits from the government, so they don't want to work anymore.
Yeah, and we'll see how long that lasts. I know, like we said, since we've had those benefits have kind of returned or been more normalized, returned to normal. We'll see if that changes. Additionally, we saw the consumer price index. It rose 5.4% in September year over year. That's a little bit faster than economists were forecasting, but that marks the fifth consecutive month that the measure was above 5% or more. So this brings, I think, into question inflation. I think that, if we've had 5 consecutive months of 5%, I think that really, I think, is a hard thing to disprove. Are we still transitory, or is this just flat out inflation? And we've talked about this. I think this puts more prudence on the fact that this is probably inflation, and we're starting to see really inflation rear its head in several different ways now. One being oil. Then you have the restriction of goods, so you have commodities prices are rising. So there's a lot of factors playing into it, but consumer prices continue to rise, and they continue to rise at an elevated pace.
Yes.
So consumer spending is another thing that picked up in August. So that was good to see. Personal outlays on goods and services rose 0.8% in August from July. So before that, we saw a 0.1% decrease in July. The last time we talked about this number, it was the July number that came out. So it's good to see that rebounded. That's one of the things that is going to be really important, as we have this kind of hopefully economic resurgence. We need people to go out. We need people spending. We need kind of the economy to kind of be running on all cylinders there. So another positive aspect, personal income increased 0.2% in August. So really good signs from that aspect. And it's good that we saw consumer spending pick back up. We also saw durable goods orders increased 1.8% in August from July. That beat expectations. Expectations were 0.6%. The biggest effect on that was transportation equipment. That was up 5.5% from July. So that was a huge contributor to that jump there. But that's good. You only see people investing in durable goods, companies investing in durable goods when they're confident that, the next 2 to 3 years are going to be positive. They wouldn't invest in this if they didn't foresee positive returns over the next couple of years. So I think that's positive. We're starting to see companies bounce back. Companies want to hire. Really good news there. Then the last thing I'll point to is the National Home Price Index. And we've talked about this as well. It rose 19.7% year over year. So it continues to bump up. It was 18.7% the last podcast we did. So it was up another 1% year over year in July from June. And it once again is setting the annual price growth, the highest. But some of the interesting things we're starting to see there is we're starting to see more and more banks either reject lending offers due to appraisals. So appraisals are coming in, as buyers go out, they agree upon a price, they go to their bank, the bank gets an appraisal on the home, and if that appraisal comes in less than what they agreed to purchase the house for, the bank will either want them to put more money down, or they'll have to go and renegotiate. So we're starting to see this extremely hot real estate market possibly slow down a little bit as banks struggle to keep up with this fast-paced real estate market. So it'll be interesting to see if the banks either, develop a new method to get, either more recent appraisals or more accurate appraisals, or if it just kind of slowly starts to slow down some of the real estate markets where you have buyers.
Well, and real estate appraisal was one of the reasons why we had a big crash in the real estate market, because there was no regulation about appraisals. So appraisals were being essentially made up in the 2006 to 2008 period. And then all of a sudden the prices were too high and everything went down. So I like to say that the real estate appraisal was one of the original dark arts. And it seemed to be for a period of years there. It was. And now they've created a whole series of regulations around it to hopefully keep that from happening. But home prices are hitting records, but now there's financing issues, Chris, as you say. So maybe it won't continue to run as much as it has. Right?
Yep.
Excellent. Great report, Chris. So, we just issued a piece about inflation, and we've been putting out pieces about inflation now for months. And the Fed had been saying that inflation is transitory. And we've been saying we don't think so, because it's been really affecting things quite a bit. The August inflation number year over year was 8% year over year, which is the highest level since August of 1981. And so that doesn't sound transitory to me. Now, there actually are parts of the economy that are not inflating in price, but certain aspects of it are. But overall, inflation has been high. And the definition of transitory is 1 year or more. And so if we had a year-over-year number, that's a record, that's not transitory. So about a month ago, the Fed came out finally, and Jerome Powell, the chairman, said, yes, that's right. It's no longer, we're worried now, it's no longer transitory after months and months and months of denying it. So the piece we put out is inflation is all the rage. Now you tell us. And that was in episode 5 on the 4-Star website and the Leadership Matrix blog. So have a look at that. Meat, fish, and poultry and eggs up 10% year over year. Gas prices are up 40%. Of course, my favorite is bacon, up 13%. So, everyone's paying more for a lot of things. The White House Chief of Staff had said that inflation is a high-class problem. And the reality is it's not. Anyone who tries to buy gas to move from place to place in their car or tries to buy bacon or food, I think every American has to buy bacon and food, or maybe they don't buy bacon, but they buy food. Those numbers are higher, and everybody gets hurt. In fact, the lower and middle classes get hurt more than the wealthy because of those inflation items. So inflation, Chris, is a big problem.
Yeah, no, and I think, and one of how it impacts, I think, the market too is, the Fed has been forecasting a potential rate hike. So, as if they do raise interest rates, that will certainly make lending, will certainly make cash essentially more expensive. And so that's one of the ways they can throttle back the economy, if you will. If you don't have as much cheap money flowing around, certainly, it gets harder. You need more return. So that is one aspect that'll be interesting to see if they do. I think they're forecasting a couple rate hikes possibly in 2022. And then even more in 2023. So inflation certainly could have a major impact on the markets and the U.S. economy.
Yes. Well, we talked before about the fears of the vaccination mandates could affect the economy. So we're seeing wide divergences in policy descriptions and what what states are going to do. And last year we saw the same thing. So certain states shut completely down and certain states did not. And we didn't see much difference between the states that shut down and the ones that didn't. So you might call the ones that shut down policy failure, meaning they probably didn't need to shut down because everyone ended up having about the same experience in COVID, whether you shut down or not. So you didn't need to probably shut down. So I think that's one lesson I think we've learned last year. Now we're going to do vaccination mandates and require everyone to get vaccinated in different roles and going into different buildings. The new governor of California, Kathy Hochul, has decided that everyone, invoking God, in fact, to force vaccines, violating many Bible agreements as well. But she's bringing in foreign workers to replace American workers who won't get vaccinated in New York. So they're really taking extreme measures to push the vaccine mandates in certain states. And in other states, they're not locking down at all and not vaccinating, mandating at all. And sure enough, we'll see what the result of that would be. If there's the purpose is to avoid the growth of this disease, COVID. And last year we saw it didn't matter, actually, if they had locked down. But now they're going to try vaccine mandates. So we'll see if that works. It may or may not, but if not, it'd be a big policy failure. So we'll see, but we'll see how it affects either way. It's going to affect the economy, and then they're going to bring in foreign workers and things like that. So there's some pretty extreme things happening in the public policy world when it comes to vaccines. So let's hope that our leaders get their act together and do the right thing.
Yep, I agree. I mean, I think that's one of the uncertainties that's still out there. The market certainly wants to see certainty in that aspect. And I think it's something that's going to unravel over the next month or two. But, we'll see how it plays out. I think obviously with this pandemic, there's been a lot of unknowns. Like you talked about, Brian, going back to whether to shut down or not shut down. And now we can evaluate that in hindsight and kind of review the outcomes. And certainly with this vaccine mandate, there's going to be evaluations after the fact. So I think it'll work itself out over the next couple months, but it definitely creates a certain cloud of uncertainty over the markets in the short term.
Yeah, and there's a jobs gap. So there's 7.6 million people unemployed. And that's down from before because some of the people who were unemployed decided they're no longer looking for work. So that number is down a little bit. But then there's still 10.9 million jobs that are unfilled. So since the stimulus programs in early September were canceled just after Labor Day weekend, a lot of that gap should narrow as people realize I got to get myself a job. And we did put out a podcast message about 4 months ago that the best stimulus program is a job, and I think we'll stick by that one. So everyone can see that on TikTok or on Instagram and LinkedIn. But we talked about, why having a job, paying taxes, being part of society is probably better for most people than getting a stimulus program. And so we'll see that jobs gap will narrow over time as more people come off the unemployment rolls and get some kind of a job. There's a mismatch in some jobs where they're highly skilled and there's no one to fill those jobs or something like that. But a lot of those jobs can be filled by people who are unemployed currently. Now, what we're seeing is in Congress, we're seeing attempts to get a major spending bill through. And we talked about that. Spending bill was expected to be $3.5 trillion. And the justification, the predicate, is that we need more spending for the stimulus. There's an opportunity here to remake the country based on the stimulus. But now there's a huge gap between the money supply and the velocity of money. So money supply has gone way up as they've printed trillions of dollars, and it's in the banks and it's in people's bank accounts. But yet the movement of that money has gone dramatically lower. So that would be the kind of indicator that would tell us that we probably don't need any more stimulus. And there's a lot of backlash. So the 3.5 trillion, which actually scored differently, would be almost 5.5 trillion. Now they're talking below 2 trillion, according to President Biden. But still nothing's decided, as we have Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kristen Sinema of Arizona, who are battling with their own party to try to keep them from doing big stimulus programs. And it would the evidence, the math would say we probably don't need any more stimulus at all. So
yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think that we have put so much stimulus. The pandemic threw, I think, the U.S. and the world through a kind of a loop there. And I think we had a lot of extra spending, that year. I think, there's a lot of money that's been thrown out in the last year and a half. And to put more money out there, I don't think it's necessarily the solution. There is money out there. It just needs to be put to work in the correct areas of the market. So I think that, if we continue to do these stimuluses and spend more, that inflation number is only going to get worse. If you continue to throw more and more money into the U.S. market, into circulation, it's just going to get worse. So it'll be interesting to see. And I think that, it's one of those counterintuitive things. You would think, all right, stimulus is going to bump things up, but, you can get things to overheat, essentially, right? If you get things moving too quickly. And if things overheat, inflation starts really spiking, the Fed will have to really clamp down and money will, get much more expensive, raise rates at an accelerated rate. And, that will cause severe problems for the economy and markets.
Well, any of the old timers listening to the podcast might remember when interest rates were in the double digits. I remember the 20% money market account I opened in 1980 in Lyons, Illinois, Lyons Federal Savings Bank. Of course, that bank didn't survive, or savings and loan, I think it was. But nonetheless, rates had to go much higher as Volcker tried to choke off inflation. And we hope we don't get into a situation like that again. But now the other really good news, however, is that even though the economy isn't completely operating at full strength, we still had in the last fiscal year the highest revenue level ever in America. So that means if the economy was growing at full strength, it would be even higher. Over $4 trillion in revenue and tax revenue came into the federal government. So that's a sign that some of the programs that have not been changed, like the tax programs and the tariff programs that have not been changed, are actually working. So why would we mess that up? Why would we cripple that? And the spending programs could actually cripple that. It would slow the economy down and the revenue productions for the country. So Now, one of the biggest problems, and Chris, I know you've been looking at this, is the shipping logjam, because there's so many dysfunctions in the economy. We've got how many ships off the port of Los Angeles?
Thousands. I mean, it's almost been surreal. Some of the pictures, they've taken of this kind of the bay right outside, Los Angeles. These ports are just, clustered with ships everywhere. These large tanker ships and cargo ships. And the Port of Los Angeles just announced actually last week that they're going to start operating 24/7, similar to the Port of Long Beach has been doing now for a couple months. And this is an attempt to free the backlog cargo ships, but it's really hard to catch up once you kind of get backlogged like that. So I think it's going to take them a while to get caught up. I know the state of California has mulled over declaring a state of emergency to try to get more funding to kind of push towards this. So, but I don't see it ending anytime soon. It's not going to be, hey, we're going to run 24/7 for a couple of weeks and it's going to be caught up. It's going to take months, if not even years for this to really kind of unwind itself, which is pretty crazy.
Yes, absolutely. Well, it's interesting times, and we, clearly we have a divide in our country in different groups politically, but we want our leaders to do well. When America does well, we all do well. So we wish them all the best, and we'll hope they figure this out. But right now there's a big divide, and we're watching now a presentation about the January 6th riots. So there's very differing opinions about all that stuff. How that affects the economy is when we're not all together, we're not all working from the same sheet of music, it creates disruption in the economy. The American economic system is the most powerful in the world. It continues to outperform everything else, despite our attempts to mess it up, which we do a pretty good job of at times. So hopefully the Congress figures it out. We get on the same page and start moving in the right direction. So what else do you have, Chris, today for the podcast?
Yeah, a couple of things I kind of see out there. I think the Reserve Bank of New Zealand, they just lifted their benchmark rate to 0.5% from 0.25%. So this is an early example of, they're starting to raise rates to try to cut off inflation. And their inflation is specifically dealing with higher oil prices being brought into New Zealand. So we're already starting to see some central banks or reserve banks raise their interest rates for their currencies to kind of start to tame in and bring in some of the inflation they're seeing. So we're seeing that out there. William Shatner became the oldest person in space. He's actually 90 year old. And obviously he's famous for portraying Captain Kirk on Star Trek. So Captain Kirk went to space in a Blue Origin rocket. So that was pretty incredible. It seems like more and more now, almost monthly, we're starting to see new information regarding whether it's SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic is the other big one. So it's kind of cool to see, and it really harkens back to the space race, I think, as we're starting to see things heat up. And then lastly, today actually, so this is October 21st, Portillo's indicated that, it went public. So they're going to IPO at $20 a share. I believe they're set to open in the market at $28 a share, so slightly up there. So Portillo's is a famous fast food joint out of Chicago that they do hot dogs, they do sausages, they do kind of Italian beef, main staples of Chicago food. So it's cool that they're going public now.
Yeah, so Dick Portillo from the west suburbs of Chicago opened with one store, kept expanding and expanding, and the drive-through line at Portillo's is like an event where people go there and they sit in line for an hour just waiting for their Portillo's hot dogs. And it's become a very big thing. So now Dick went public, right?
Yep, exactly. They're going public today.
Good for Dick. Good for Dick. Well, good. Well, we're getting to the end here of our 100th episode of the podcast. And for those who are watching in TikTok and they see the video, I'm wearing a maroon shirt from the University of Chicago, which is the Maroons. And those of you who are following closely realize that the colors of 4-Star are maroon and gray and white. I think there's a coincidence here, right? It had probably the same colors as my alma mater, University of Chicago Booth School. And so we're just finishing up the podcast. We have a special guest who is going to make us a presentation. Would you like to join us here?
Hey, Brian, Chris,
Dave,
thanks for having me.
This is Dave Gotro. Dave is an avid listener of the podcast, and he's done a cameo before on the beach Diamond Lake, yeah.
So
So
we're here in Cancun, beautiful Cancun. So I figured I'd come off the beach. Wish you guys
100th
congratulations on
100th
100th podcast. And
Oh, yeah.
a little champagne for you.
a little champagne. We're going to drink this later.
Of course,
Here on the
later.
beach in
Of course, later.
Yeah, we're not going to drink it now because we have to think about economics now. But,
That's a good milestone. Congratulations, you and your team.
excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank
And I'll
you.
continue to listen to the next podcast, especially on the bacon crisis.
Bacon is a big deal. Bacon is a big deal. All right.
All right.
Well, Chris, thanks, Dave, for being with us. Chris, thanks for being today here in the podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. And look forward to next couple of episodes. We had an episode that came out talking about Nashville real estate. Nashville is a hot city. A lot going on. That's on all the services. We did an interview with Mark Deutschman, who's one of the leaders of the development of Nashville, which is now one of the hottest cities in America. And then we're also going to have an interview coming out with Dunn Capital Management about managing commodities and futures and all those really fun things that most people don't really invest in, but now it's maybe time to do that. So that episode will be coming out as well. That'll be Chris episode number 101. So anyway, thanks, Chris. Why don't we leave it there, huh?
Sounds good.
All right, everybody. Thanks for being with us today on the 100th episode of the 4-Star Podcast. And have a great week, and we'll be back very soon.